Issues in the internet and in computing. One of the more interesting issues, I think, is that the challenge with a lot of new technologies, you know, we talked about how in the old days you had to be very wealthy to be able to have a portrait painted of your family. So that meant that many people never had an opportunity to archive, you know, an image of their family because they just couldn't afford to have it done. And that technology, as it gets cheaper, helps you to do that. But there are still problems with being able to get technology into the hands of all the people who want it and who could use it. I mean, we do know that there are so many people around the world who will never have the opportunity to use a smartphone or to use a computer. They're simply in remote locations without enough, and there's this digital divide. Even within our own country, there are people who are living in neighborhoods where their kids are not having access to the ability to use high-class, classy, great computers in their classrooms because they're way behind on technology. There's also a generational divide. If you look at this chart, you'll see that older people have had someone, I mean, though many of them have taken to the internet like ducks to water. I mean, one of the biggest groups online for a long time was AARP, sharing information with its people. But they tend not to participate as much. There is a generational divide. Young people are the digital generation growing up, and they grow up with it organically. It's part of their life. It's not something that they have to learn. It's just that it's there for them all the time. And so they're able to become digital natives, and that's a different kind of ballgame for a lot of people, to be able to have it as part of your, you know, growing up experience. New stuff, integrating social media into a seamless whole. We're seeing a dramatic change in how the web is being used. We're on the cusp, I think, of another dramatic and major breakthrough. We're seeing the internet of everything being discussed, where it's going to be that little pieces of the internet are embedded in things. They're now selling through, not selling, they're, you know, you can sign up at Amazon to get a little gizmo that you put on your washing machine. And it's tied, it sends a little signal through the internet to Amazon to send you soap. You know, you tap it every time you go to put a load of laundry in, and it sends a message, and Amazon keeps track of when it is you're going to need more soap, right? So they go ahead and they send it to you automatically because it's the internet of everything. We now have these distributed devices, whether it's going to be the internet in your refrigerator, keeping track of what's going bad in there so that you remember to get fresh milk so that it's not curdled when you go to pour it on something. So those are the things that are changing about the internet. Social media are allowing us to log into this whole new world and be able to control more things that way. The other big thing is big data. Big data. Oh, that is an interesting phenomenon. What happens as we see large corporations like Amazon, like Facebook, gathering so much information about us? I mean, they know who we are. They know all of my buying patterns. They know which kinds of watercolor paint I buy. They know what kinds of size of brushes I like, that sort of thing. I mean, they know so much about us, right? That makes it an opportunity to be able to take and sort of smoosh together all these different streams of information and be able to make analyses and decisions. And let me tell you what I mean about that. Let's start out with Google and the flu, okay? One of the challenges that the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, has every year is trying to figure out how to configure the flu vaccine for this year. It's really a tight timetable. They've got to know what the flu vaccine looks like in the late summer to be able to build a vaccine in enough time to be able to get the flu shots to us by the time that we need them. But if they wait too late until they get final answers, you know, then the stuff might not be there when we need it, and if it's a really nasty one, we could be in big trouble. On the other hand, if they do it too early before they know, then they're just going to miss it. And the chances are, we had a flu vaccine last year. I think there was only, 60% effective. It wasn't very effective. It only covered 60% of the likely viruses, flu viruses you were going to run into. So the CDC would do these surveys with public health departments around the country trying to find out what kind of vaccine they needed to build for that year. Well, somebody wisely realized that it was easier to just go to Google. Google was able to process 450 million mathematical models to come up with search terms that worked for the flu. What happens when you get the flu, right? You go to the great Google machine and you put in things like sneezing, fever, runny nose, And so they're able to monitor the search terms that people are using on Google, and because of the analysis that they did to be able to track this kind of information about the flu, they're now able to use Google to predict where the flu, they can go check then and see what strains of flu are in those areas, and they can tailor-make a vaccine that is better than the one that they did when they were serving their own health departments. Now that's an example of using big data. The data is there. The search terms being used on Google are there. And this is an opportunity for people to be able to use that information right straight from Google. And it's actually better than the information from the government itself. Here's another example of where big data got its start. Oren Etzione's Faircast. It's a program that uses real-time data about people ordering up plane tickets to be able to tell trends about whether the price of that next ticket is going to rise or fall, right? Because we all know that the prices on airlines, no two seats are almost nowadays charged the same price. He was able to sit on top of that big data of all those transactions taking place and set up a predictive program where people could go to him and he could send them to the place that was likely to be able to send them to the place where the price was going down and not up. It's also led to a sort of dark side because now the government has also realized that being able to take data that says this person said, mom, and this person said, I don't know, terrorist, and take all that information and be able to build a portrait of who is likely to be investigating the possibilities of bringing us harm. It has led to the surveillance industry. And the surveillance industry, as we know from Edward Snowden, we're now calculating the storage for this in exabytes. Look at the size of that NSA facility that's being built in Utah to house all of this data. All of our telephone calls, all of our information from what we're browsing on our browser history. Very contentious right now about exactly what the government should and should not be allowed to be able to capture from us and be able to put it in different, hang on to in order to be able to analyze it and try to do what's called threat assessment. See which ones of us they should be keeping an eye on. Very controversial. But that's the kind of things that can happen now with big data. So it's as we build these large kinds of data repositories, what are we going to do with all that information? Business wants its hands on that. I mean, the reason that you see this, what do those three things have in common? Walmart can chart, and when there's a bump in the number of sales of Pop-Tarts and flashlights, that means a hurricane's coming to town. They knew about the flashlights, they could see that one, but they didn't realize that the Pop-Tarts were another good indicator that people were really concerned about the forthcoming hurricane. All again part of big data. The other thing that's new with big data and the fact that we're gathering these huge data sets is that you know that, well, one of the things we'll be talking about when we talk about media research is you do a small sample size. Say you want to find out who you think is going to be winning in the primaries. Is Donald Trump still at the head of the GOP primary? Well, if you're a pollster, you'll do a very small sample size. You'll maybe do just a few hundred people nationwide, maybe a couple thousand, and they represent larger groups. And we know some of that data is getting flakier and flakier because it's harder and harder to get a really good representative group. We've got situations where people now, young people are on cell phones. It's harder to get those telephone numbers to call them for a telephone survey. So that kind of research is getting harder and harder to do. It's not very good anymore. It's not as good as it once was. A lot of people just won't participate in surveys anymore. Harder to get a representative sample. What about on the internet? You can get everybody. You could ask everybody. You could take a look at what everybody is doing. Scientific research is very different if you don't need to do a sample to be able to see what's happening, but you could actually take a look at what's happening with everybody. So that's one of the ways in which things are changing. Another way in which the internet is changing everything is Google Books. They have digitized 20 million books, and they're still going at it. They're having some difficulties with questions about copyright and sort of orphan and neglected copyright, where somebody 30 years ago, their publishing company went bust, and it's hard to find out who even owns it. But ultimately, Google Books is trying to take all of the information and digitize it, because now not only do you digitize, but you datify. It means that you can search it. It's not just that it's there to be read, but that you can search it and you can probe it, and that's a very different ballgame. Datafication, turning life into data. We are now gathering so much data on ourselves that we can do analysis of, instead of, when they ask you in the survey question, and how much exercise do you get every week? How many miles do you walk every week? Now, with our pedometers built into our phones, we can turn that into data and we can figure out, and you know what's interesting? Gee, we tend to walk more on Tuesdays. Wonder why that is. Oh, well, let's do a map overlay with Google Maps and we'll find out, oh, well, that's because on Tuesdays we walk from here to the library. Oh, and that's farther. So those are the kinds of things you can do with this big data that never was there before. There's another term you need to know, and that's the semantic web. Wolfram Alpha is the search engine that's built by Tim Berners-Lee, the father of the internet. And Berners-Lee said that really what people want is they want to be able to go to the internet. And for example, if you've just discovered that you've got breast cancer, you really don't want to just put breast cancer into there and all of a sudden you get a bunch of things that are like a Wikipedia definition, maybe some statistics. You really want to know that, okay, I'm a 42-year-old female in Seattle diagnosed with stage 2 breast cancer. What treatments should I have that are the best for me? That's what you really want to know. He says if we can get enough data uploaded into the internet and enough data sets uploaded by government, by business, by anybody who has them, that we can build an internet where we can go to the internet with those kinds of questions and get them answered. That is the semantic web, being able to use a semantic context to ask the kinds of questions that you really want answers for. Another thing you can do with the web is you can harness all the unused power. A lot of our computers are sitting there on all the time, on our desktops, on our laptops, and there are things running in the background, but we're really not using them to the full capacity that we could. Louis Van Ahn invented CAPTCHA in 2000. CAPTCHA is those little irritating things that I can hardly see, where in order to be able to prove to them I'm not a robot or a computer bot, I have to do 892BH1 capitals. He's also doing a new version of that where it's called reCAPTCHA, and it's being able to put millions of people to work doing data analysis at the same time. We have these remarkable tools in front of us. How do we make the most of them? There's a fun part of this whole new big data revolution that's going on as well, and that's what I call, or what I don't call, but what people call non-obvious results. They take data from one stream and they match it with data from another, and they get answers to questions that are really kind of, what the heck is going on? Well, how did that ever happen? What is the best color of a used car to buy? If you want the least maintenance, the fewest problems, what color car should you buy? You wouldn't think of normally asking the question in terms of color. You'd think in terms of asking the make or the model or the kind of car. But it turns out when you do a data mashup, you find out that orange cars tend to be the safest and they require the least maintenance. Why? I don't know. They don't know. But the correlation is there and you could potentially use it. Here's another non-obvious result. What is the best predictor that you're going to make your flight? That you're not going to be late, that you're not going to miss your flight. What's the best predictor? Airlines would love to know that. They'd love to know the kind of people they could count on to get there, and they'd love to know the kind of people that they better prod, because that empty seat is a problem. There's always a fight about it. If you don't get there in time, then they've got to try to accommodate you on a later flight. What's the best predictor? The people who make the flights are the ones who order the vegetarian option. They think it's because what goes on is that if you take the time to order the vegetarian option, you're going to be more likely to say, I want to get there to eat it. Now, that seems a bit surprising, but that appears to be what happens. So that's kind of an interesting phenomenon. Excuse me. Now, here's an interesting one, and I think maybe some of you will be able to figure this out. There are good photographs online and there are kind of crappy photographs online. You know, there's the really bad kind of snapshot, and then there's the gorgeous, beautiful landscape or gorgeous sunset, really beautiful stuff. The bad ones are if you have the search terms San Jose, mommy, graduation, CEO. The good ones are Peru, Cambodia, Michigan, tombs, trails, and boats. Now, you can kind of figure out that the ones with mommy and graduation, those are going to be kind of bad pictures because it's just going to be snapshots people took of birthday parties or graduation ceremonies. Half of them are going to be poorly exposed, poorly framed, not great composition. And you could say, okay, well, good pictures. I don't know particularly why Peru and Cambodia, other than they have some beautiful tourist locations. But what about Michigan? What makes Michigan? If one of the search terms is Michigan and it means that you're going to see a good photo, what's that all about? Well, guess what the answer is? It's that Pure Michigan campaign, right? If you've got a gorgeous photograph, and the photographs for the Pure Michigan campaign are beautiful, people who take a really good photograph then will tag theirs as Pure Michigan as well. So Michigan is showing up in a lot of the data analysis as showing us a really good side, really good type of photograph by being able to, the big data people know that now if you search for Michigan, that ups your chances you'll see a good picture. Now, there is that dark side to the web. There is that issue of privacy as we put more and more of our data into electronic formats, send it up to the cloud, make it possible for government and businesses to share things. They force us to sign terms of service where we don't realize we're giving away not only our information, but the information on our firstborn child. Makes you kind of nervous. What if they can take your motel bill, your telephone records, some of your personal data and be able to mash it up together? What are they going to learn about you in ways that you may not want them to know about you? How are you going to be able to maintain privacy in this world? We see that movie Minority Report, for example, that says pre-crime. We can now anticipate, this young person had some problems in their juvenile record, and they are now, we're seeing, buying alcohol more based on the records that we're seeing from the bar, and we know they have poor impulse control. This is a youngster we should be keeping an eye on. Is that where we want to go? The computer is giving us the capacity to do this, and we have to start questioning whether that's where we really want to go. Let's talk a little bit, too, about how the computer has expanded our choices online, and in one case, particularly for the news. I mean, where people are getting their news nowadays is very different than it was before. I mean, they used to sit down in the 50s, and Walter Cronkite would tell them what happened in the world, and everybody would trust him, and he would say, and that's the way it is. Now what you have is that your friends are sharing you headlines, and sometimes they're for things that you want to know about, sometimes they're for things you don't want to know about, but over time, Facebook gets better and better at trying to give you the things that you actually care about. But they can share things that are wrong. Half the time, you have to go check it on Snopes to make sure that they're not passing along misinformation. There are humor sites like The Onion, and even legislators have been known to go freaking out because they read an article on The Onion and they think it's true, and they decide they better pass a law against something. So part of the challenge online is that there is as much misinformation out there as there is reliable information, and it's up to you to figure out which is which. There are more opportunities for political activism online. When you were trying to organize a march in the Civil Rights March back in the 60s, it was a challenge. How do you get the word to people? Maybe you could get it to them Sunday in church. Maybe you could get it to them through the schools. Maybe you could organize a sort of telephone tree and call people. But nowadays on the internet, it becomes much easier to be able to recruit people for these kinds of things. But it can also lead to what's called sort of slacktivism. It's where people find it very easy to click on a link and say, yes, I support this petition, but how deep is their commitment? Would they be willing to show up at a march as well? Would they be willing to go and talk to their legislators about what they think the changes should be in government? Or is it just too easy to go click, click, click and think that somehow you have been politically active? That's the question. We see that the internet in use in other countries, this is Tahrir Square in Egypt a few years ago that led to the overthrow of the Mubarak regime. There is power in the internet. You can get a crowd. It's more difficult to say, what do you do after you win? Can you use social media to be able to coherently put together policies and be able to make the kinds of changes that you want to make? There are also opportunities for personal expression. We talk a lot in journalism about being unbiased, but trust me, one of the things that people like is they like bias. They like opinion. They like different ideas. You'll see at the top there's Wonket. Wonket is a name owned by Gawker. They own the name. Different people sit in the seat. It's always a woman who does the sort of very funny kind of political DC humor type column. It was originally done by Marie Cox, who really branded it. She's since gone on to a number of very important jobs in the media field with Time magazine and with The Guardian. But she started out making $27,000 a year writing as Wonquette. And her sort of conceit was that she would go out and get drunk at cocktail parties in Washington and give you the inside scoop. And she would be very funny in doing it. Then she built up a huge following. And Gawker's been very successful in being able to take these kinds of different sites, their Gawker site, their Wonquette site, and mainstream them and make money on them and put it together a media empire with these opinion sites. Alexandra Sullivan, you see his site down there called The Dish. It started out as a personal blog. He then sold it to Newsweek and Daily Beast and then took it back and then stopped it. He was able to raise hundreds of thousands of dollars a year from fans of his blog who were willing to support it because they liked his ideas. But we see it's this idea of being able to put a spin on something, to have a coherent point of view. You become an individual that people trust. So you can also get your news from people who tell you the news. The careers in new media, the careers on the net are really enormous. I mean, there's so much that you can be doing now with trying to figure out a niche for yourself. We have apps and tablets and HTML5. We can do all sorts of fabulous things to be able to get information to people in new formats. I'm a particular fan of Snapchat. Has this new Discover button, right, where you go there and they have all these wonderfully visual stories from the Geographic, from CNN, from a place called Tastemade. I'd never heard of that before, but they have recipes that they show you how to make stuff, and I love to watch them. So we have all of these new opportunities. So at the same time we talk about the web being a source for sort of a destructive force in the sense that it has put a real challenge to the mainstream media to try to survive in an internet era when so many of their advertising dollars are going elsewhere. But at the same time, there's all these enormous opportunities. Back when I was doing that Web Cities tour in 2000, Craig Newmark of Craigslist was there. And many of the people in the journalism industry were just furious with him because he was taking away all the classified advertising. Classified advertising, they figured the newspapers in that year figured they'd lost $27 million to Newmark. He only had 7 employees. And he was able to do what those newspapers had done for years for a lot of money. And that was money that was used to pay for reporters, pay for cameras, pay for buildings, pay for all of their overhead. And there was a real shakeout in the news business. So there was a lot of ill will at first about what was the internet doing to our business. But it has enormous opportunities that we've only begun to scratch the surface. Clay Shirky, for example, talks about how we have this cognitive surplus. We have all of these people here on the internet, and they want to do well. They want to do right by people. We see sites like GoFundMe, where when you discover that your neighbor has had a fire and they don't have anything and they need help and you need to be able to get something to them, you can go to a crowdsourcing site or a crowdfunding site and give them some money. I had a friend who was laid up for quite a while. She had a very bad back. I used Meal Train to be able to organize all of her friends so that we brought food to their house every night so that she didn't have to try to sit up and stand up and try to cook for her family. Those are things that you can do now through the internet that they made it so easy, and you can do those kinds of things for free. These are free apps. So there's this wonderful, wonderful potential of the web. But again, we always have to balance that with a clear-headed analysis of the dark side of the web. Nicholas Carr, who writes for the New York Times, wrote a book called The Shallows. One of his big concerns is that using a computer shapes your mind. The research shows that even within 5 days, if you give somebody who had never had access to a computer an opportunity to do so and they start clicking around and searching, their attention span begins to decline. We have real concerns about young kids using the internet, becoming more and more impatient, becoming harder and harder to read a long book. You want to click away. You want to be able to go look at something else. You want to be able to move around. Is it rewiring our brains? Do we do enough research to see the implications of that and to know for sure what's going on with this new advent of the web? So we also see that the web can be a host for hate. There are sites like Stormfront, and because we're a believer in free speech, we don't shut down these sites, but they are ones that are very, they promote violence. They're a concern. I have a friend who was a writer in the LGBT community. He came to the attention of some neo-Nazis who shared information. Fortunately, he was watching on Stormfront and discovered that they were sending somebody to beat him up at his house. and he and the FBI were able to intercept those people before he got them. Those are the kinds of things that are of concern when we see hate sites on the web. So there is a dark side to the web. There is cyberbullying. This is a huge concern. Teenage kids who are hounding one another and who are really putting each other at risk for the kinds of use of social media to humiliate or embarrass or attack one another. Those are the kinds of concerns that we have yet to deal with completely. What do we do about the trolls? What do we do about the trolls for something like Gamergate, where they went after women, and literally women, some of the women involved in that incident where they were writing about the gaming industry had to leave their homes because of the fear that people were going to come after them. So there is that dark side to the web. We see that there is infotoxins. A bad idea takes root and it spreads. We need antidotes to misinformation and infotoxins. We need good speech to drive out bad speech. And we need to find out ways to fund that good speech and to make it accessible and easy for people to get their hands on. We need transparency. If you're writing an article on the web, I need to know who you are. I need to know if that's your real identity or whether that's an identity that you have just in the internet world. I need to know where you're getting your information from. We have to be the people that do a much better job of figuring out where that information comes from. It comes down to us. So I guess that's what I'd like to close with, is the idea that what the web is going to look like in the future is up for grabs. But it's going to be up to us. We're the people who make the choices. The things we click on determine what it is that's going to succeed and what it is that's going to fail. If all we do is go for the hot fudge sundae of watching the latest fashion online or watching the latest sports online or maybe even, just clicking on that latest, Justin Bieber's personal parts, okay, we may be encouraging and supporting behavior that we don't want to see supported. We don't want an intrusive web that takes people's personal photos and puts them up there and circulates them online, and we no longer have any control over that, because it puts enormous pressure on people who aren't celebrities, people who may not have the resources to fight back. We also know that there's this capacity to be able to use the web in ways to change the world. We're facing enormous problems. We have issues of climate change, for example. We could band together online and share ideas and use this as a force for good. So one of the challenges I would leave you with is that when it comes to the use of the computer and the browsers that we have, we all want a little hot fudge in our diet. We all want to be able to go over and take a look at the latest scandal or see what's happening. But we also need to be responsible, and we need to use this enormously powerful tool for good. We need to be able to figure out how to be good citizens, how to vote for the right people, how to be able to make wise decisions in our personal and professional lives, and how to do things that enhance the overall quality of life in not only our country but around the world, and close that digital divide and the generational divide so that we have more and more people participating. So I guess that's the thought I'd like to leave you with, and we'll talk soon about coming up with advertising, public relations, all sorts of other wonderful parts of media. Thank you for participating.